Lookouts atop the walls of seven-gated Thebes glance idly across the horizon for any sign of trouble. Nothing. They return to puffing on Benson and hedges and playing backgammon with their mates. Nearby, their double-ended spears and bronze helmets lean lazily in the sun against the high tower walls. No one's going to need those today. Suddenly, there's a huge commotion as a worried scout dashes into the city, gesticulating wildly and pointing to a spot on the skyline. There's something to the north, something big. Hopping to their feet so quickly they knock over their ashtrays and scatter their playing cards, the lookouts strain to see into the distance. By Heracles, he's right! There's a muted plume of dust hanging in the air and a faint shimmer on the horizon, almost as if a gigantic Macedonian phalanx is headed this way. But it can't be that Gen Z pretender King Alexander III of Macedon. Last they heard, he was both dead and very far away. And how much damage can a distant corpse really do to one of Greece's ancient superpowers? Exactly. Perhaps it's a small breakaway force sent from Macedon by that stuffy old statesman Antipater? Yeah, that'll be it. Small force or not, runners rush to alert everyone. The enemy is here! Yes, already! Prepare for attack! Outside the city, there's a mad dash to get everyone and everything inside the walls. Farmers drive sheep, goat and oxen into the city, and nearby citizens desert their olive groves, vineyards and country estates, hauling as much grain, olive oil and wine with them as they can carry. What can I say? Some people have got their priorities straight. Slaves drive donkey-drawn carts that lumber over the rocky countryside, carrying wide-eyed children, elderly parents, and a mishmash of worldly possessions to safety. Or so they think. Finally, men who've been shoring up the city's outer defences abandon their work. Let's hope those spiky wooden fences are a match for the greatest army the ancient world has ever seen. Meanwhile, inside the city it's pandemonium. Messengers dash between city leaders who, spoiler alert, will be making some seriously bad decisions in the hours to come. Older children run errands, grinding grain, buying salted meat and taking supplies to family across town. The arrival en masse of so many people sends women and slaves hurrying to fill additional water jars from the city's wells. There's suddenly going to be a lot more thirsty folks around here, and no one wants to be stuck in a line at the ancient equivalent of Tesco. Some things never change. Last but not least, every male citizen of fighting age is kitting himself out in his best armour. But ain't no matching uniforms of green berets and combat boots in ancient Thebes. Instead, each man wears what he can afford. And this means that they're a ramshackle rabble with armour ranging from the formidable to the why did you bother putting it on. The poorest soldiers sport little more than a hand-me-down helmet, battered leather-bound shield, and a spear that has seen better days. While the richest are doing their Iron Man impressions, clad head to toe in gleaming bronze. Bring it on, Obadiah. But the egalitarians among us will be delighted to hear that today, none of this is going to make a blind bit of difference. Rich or poor, Iron Man or Iron Maiden, today the Thebans' number is up. And now, rumours have it that there's an Alexander leading this army. But surely not that Alexander. Perhaps, some people say, it's Alexander of Lynkestis leading this army. You know, that guy who was accused of plotting Philip's murder in episode 1. Yes, that's far less scary. But as time wears on, just how dire the situation is for Thebes becomes clear. On their doorstep is not a small breakaway force, but the entire Macedonian army, all 33,000 of them. And no, Alexander is not dead. He's very much alive, and he's sending some heralds a-calling. Welcome to the Alexander the Great podcast, Season 1, Empire on Fire. I'm your host, Dr Fay Edwards, and this is Episode 2, Poetic Justice for Revolting Thebes. Thebes is the most important ancient Greek city you've probably never heard of. It was the setting for many of the famous stories and religious myths that formed the backbone of Greek culture. If you'd visited as an ancient tourist in the 4th century BCE, you'd probably have been shown the tomb of the wine god Dionysus, the birthplace of that 12-laboured hero Heracles, and perhaps even the houses of the poet Pindar and of that infamous motherfucker, Oedipus. For more on all this, listen to episode 2.4, A Cursed City, the Mythology of Ancient Thebes. Thebes also played a central role on the political stage. Within living memory, they'd intervened in Macedonian throne disputes, which were common, and even held Alexander's dad hostage as a teenager to make sure Macedonian promises were kept. They weren't. Ancient Thebes was also a military superpower to be reckoned with. Who among us isn't impressed by the fighting prowess of the Spartans? This is Sparta! But in their heyday, the Thebans whooped the Spartans' asses so badly that the Spartan king had to let deserters forego the usual punishment of being stripped of their citizenship. If he hadn't, there'd have been no male Spartan citizens left to have Spartan babies. Put succinctly, while Alexander was growing up, Thebes was Macedon's most formidable opponent. But then, 3 years before this episode opens, Philip and Alexander wiped the floor with Thebes at the Battle of Chaeronea. They smashed through the elite fighting force of the Sacred Band as if they were weedy heterosexuals. If you don't get that joke, have a listen to episode 1.2. After this victory, the ever-forward-thinking Philip did 3 things. First, he kicked out hostile Theban leaders, including Phoenix and Prothetes, to stop them stirring up anti-Macedonian sentiment. Second, he forced Thebes to join the League of Corinth. Remember, that's like an ancient EU. And to swear allegiance to Macedon as its leader. And third, he stationed Macedonian soldiers come babysitters in the Theban citadel. You know, just to be sure they ate their broccoli and went to bed on time. Oh, Thebes, how the tables have turned. Now, in 335 BCE, when this episode opens, Philip's soldiers are still in that Theban fortress, watching late-night TV and eating Doritos. Of course, all of these measures were humiliating for Thebes, but while Philip was around, they had to put up and shut up. Now, though, there's an opening. Philip's as dead as a door peg, and everyone's saying that Alexander is dead too. Carpeing the DM, those anti-Macedonian Thebans, Phoenix and Prothetes have snuck back into the city and started stirring that big old pot. According to Arian, appearing in the assembly, they incited the Thebans to rebel against Alexander, winning trust from the people by affirming that Alexander had died in Illyria. In fact, this was common talk. He'd been long away and no word had come from him, so that in ignorance of the facts, they conjectured what they most desired. The message is clear. Now's our chance! Hearing that Thebes is considering revolt, their old frenemies, the Athenians, start egging them on. That meddling orator Demosthenes is doing what he does best, drumming up Macedonian hatred in the Athenian assembly. He's even hauled a bloodied soldier before them who insists he saw with his own eyes Alexander killed in battle. Ironically, when Alexander actually is dead in years to come, the Greeks dare not believe the reports. Once burnt. Go on, Thebes, says Athens. Sock it to that barbarian boy king who thinks he's a hero from Homer. Homer Simpson, more like. We'll send our best warriors your way. After a pub lunch for an hour. Other Greek states, who are equally keen to shrug off the heavy yoke of Macedonian rule, cross their hearts and hope to die that they'll be sending armies to join Thebes too. Very soon. Last but not least, also rumoured to be on Thebes' side is their old ally, Persia. Remember the 300? Those brave Spartans who died defending Greece against a massive Persian invasion, led by the Lord of Bling himself, Xerxes? This is Sparta! Well, you may be shocked to learn that Thebes was on the side of the baddies in that scuffle. Awkward. That was 150 years ago by the time this episode opens, but Greeks have memories like elephants for this sort of thing. Don't worry, friends. It's all coming back to bite them in the backside in a moment. With all of these different folks on side, Thebes has the confidence to revolt against Macedon and rip up the papyrus its League of Corinth membership is written on. But how do they let Macedon know that? They can't just announce it on Truth Social. No. Instead, they ambush and murder 2 of the Macedonian soldiers that are stationed in their own citadel, place the rest of the soldiers in the citadel under siege, and then wait for their very clear "up yours" to get back to Alexander, or some Macedonian who isn't dead at any rate. And this is where the dramatic opening of our episode begins, with those lazy lookouts atop the walls. At this point, it's late summer 335 BCE, and it's been a whole year since King Philip's untimely death. In that time, Alexander's done nothing but quash rebellions. It's been like a game of rebel whack-a-mole. And when Thebes kills those Macedonian soldiers, Alexander is in the mountainous territories to the north of Macedon, some 250 miles away from Thebes. For more on what he's been up to in this period, see episode 2.5, A Game of Rebel Whack-a-Mole in the Barbarian North. No doubt rolling his melting eyes, when Alexander hears that Thebes is another mole in need of a whack, he readies his mallet. The faster he can deal with this insult, the better. The last thing he needs is for those other pesky Greeks to go joining forces with Thebes and delaying him from getting on with his real job of conquering Persia. Honestly. And this is why Alexander and his entire army, some 30,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry, travel to Thebes with lightning speed. So fast, in fact, that no one can believe it's him when he first arrives. He covers the 250-mile distance in just 14 days, marching all the way from modern-day Albania down to modern-day central Greece. That's about 9 marathons in full armour with a baggage train, pack animals and no modern vehicles or roads through difficult, rocky and mountainous terrain. And then he's all, "Surprise! I'm not dead after all." Alexander's envoy is approaching the gates of Thebes. In his right hand, he carries a herald's staff, topped with a loop and pincer design. It looks a bit like an ancient litter picker, but it's actually a sacred symbol of his office and shows he's protected by Hermes, god of messengers. "Morning, governor," says the herald. "I come bearing a message from King Alexander himself. Hand over Phoenix and Prothetes, since they're the ringleaders who started this ill-judged rebellion, and the rest of you can go unarmed." These are generous terms, and the messenger's half expecting the Theban leaders to accept on the spot. But then comes the snotty retort. "No, you hand over Philotas and Antipater, and the rest of you can go unarmed." The herald almost drops his litter picker in shock. The Thebans go on. "We're calling on all Greeks to fight for freedom from Alexander the Macedonian tyrant." Well, you've got to admire their nerve. Returning to Alexander's camp, the herald reports the Thebans' reply, and it sends Alexander into a flying rage. How dare they call him a tyrant? It's time he made an example out of them. Men of Macedon, ready yourselves for battle. Now, Thebes is a heavily fortified city about the size of New York's Central Park, with as many inhabitants as a small modern-day town. It's cosy before Alexander arrives, and after he arrives it's like a packed football stadium, only instead of seats give everyone a house, several children and a goat, and you'll have an idea of what these ancient people were going through. The surrounding city walls in Thebes are as wide as a Ford Focus is long, and they're as high as a modern 3-story house. In short, if this were a normal conflict, it would take a lengthy siege to bring Thebes down. But this is not a normal conflict. Why? Because of those Dorito-munching troops inside the citadel. Thanks, Dad. You see, this citadel isn't in the centre of Thebes. Instead, it lies against the southern wall of the city. Imagine a googly eye sticker with the pupil resting at the bottom. That pupil is the citadel. So too, there are gates leading through the south wall into the citadel. This means that if the Thebans don't cordon off this gate, Alexander could, quite literally, walk in the front door. This is why the Thebans can't just retreat inside their walls. They have to stop Alexander from getting to his soldiers in the citadel. To their credit, the Thebans have thought about this in the 5 minutes they've had before Alexander arrives, and they've hurriedly built 2 spiky wooden fences called palisades to deal with the problem. That's what those blokes working on the outer city defences were doing when Alexander went all Lazarus on us at the start of the episode. One palisade is to stop the soldiers in the citadel getting out to Alexander, and the other is to stop Alexander getting in to the soldiers. The Thebans then station themselves in the rather precarious position between the 2 palisades to keep Alexander at bay. But of course, the palisades are practically papier-mâché by comparison with the thick stone wall around the rest of the city. Where would you attack first if you were Alexander? It's a tough one. Thebes really need their allies to finish that pub lunch and get a wriggle on with the reinforcements. Must be a slow kitchen. Little do they know, but despite all the big talk, Athens are now doing the military equivalent of whistling a merry tune and tying their shoelaces. All is not lost, though. Another ally, called Arcadia, have sent an army. But they've stopped to watch what happens first before entering the fray. Thebes, you're on your own. Oh, and you're outnumbered 5-1. Good luck to you. At this point, our sources disagree. Arrian insists that Alexander never gave the order to attack, but that General Perdiccas went off-piste. He says, Perdiccas did not await Alexander's signal for battle, but himself first attacked the palisade and, tearing it apart, broke in on the Theban advance guard. Seeing this, Alexander brought up the rest of the army so that they might not be stranded and at the mercy of the Thebans. Throughout Arrian's account, Alexander is very passive, calm and controlled. He doesn't really want to attack Thebes, and he's hoping they'll change their mind. It's almost as if he sacks the city by accident. Meanwhile, Diodorus gives Alexander much more agency. According to him, Alexander absolutely gave the order to attack. The king, in the course of only 3 days, made everything ready for the assault. He divided the force into 3 parts and ordered one to attack the palisades. For a look at how trustworthy our sources are on Alexander, listen to episode 2.3. He said, a choose your own Alexander story. Whatever the truth of the matter, the result is the same. To the sound of trumpets and battle cries, Alexander's men hack through the flimsy palisades and assault the Theban cavalry and soldiers fighting between them. And the fighting is ferocious. Many were wounded in both armies, and not a few fell facing the blows of the enemy. The air was filled with the roar of fighters locked in the struggle, moans and shouts and exhortations. On the Macedonian side, not to be unworthy of their previous exploits, and on the Theban, not to forget the children and wives and parents threatened with slavery, and to remember the battles which were household names throughout Greece. Fighting to defend everything they hold dear, for a staggering moment the Thebans push the Macedonians back. In the chaos, General Perdiccas is severely wounded and has to be carried off the battlefield. 70 of Alexander's archers are massacred along with their leader, and when Alexander sees all this, he charges. How Alexander of him! Alexander, seeing that his own men were in flight, and that the Thebans had broken formation in pursuit, charged them with the phalanx in battle order. The Thebans were pushed inside the gates. Their flight became a panic, so that while being thrust through the gates into the city, they could not shut them in time. Thus, within a surprisingly short amount of time, Alexander has completely overcome the Thebans. Not bad for a dead guy. Around 500 Macedonian soldiers have been slaughtered in the vicious fighting, and those who are left pillage, rape, and kill at will, breaking into houses, looting valuables, ripping children and women from the sacred places where they've gone to take refuge. It's carnage. Many and varied were the scenes of destruction within the walls. Enraged by the arrogance of the Theban proclamation, the Macedonians pressed upon them more furiously than usual in war, and shrieking curses, flung themselves on the wretched people, slaying all whom they met without sparing any. No Theban was seen begging the Macedonians to spare their life, but neither did the agony of courage elicit pity. All the city was pillaged. Everywhere, boys and girls were dragged into captivity as they wailed piteously the names of their mothers. Spare a thought for those poor kids 2,000 years ago. Once more, Arrian is keen to distance Alexander from the worst offences, blaming instead age-old Theban adversaries. He says, "And then, in hot blood, it was not so much the Macedonians as the Phocians, Plataeans, and the other Boeotians who slaughtered the Thebans without restraint. All in all, 6,000 Thebans are killed, and 30,000 sold off into slavery, earning Alexander 440 talents of silver. This is enough to pay his entire army for 2.5 months. Quite handy in the run-up to Persia." When the worst of the human suffering is over, Alexander asks a handful of representatives from the League of Corinth what should be done with Thebes. They promptly engage in a game of historical one-upmanship. Men who were hostile to the Thebans began to recommend that they should be visited with the direst penalties, and they pointed out that they'd taken the side of the barbarians against the Greeks, for in the time of Xerxes they'd actually joined forces with the Persians and campaigned against Greece. It was finally voted to raze the city, to sell the captives, and to allow no Greek to offer shelter to a Theban. Surely it's only fitting that Thebes, who allied with Persia against the Greeks, should get their comeuppance ahead of Alexander's Persian invasion. Told you, memories like elephants. It probably helps that the decision-makers are from cities that Thebes has destroyed and enslaved in the past. Now, the shoe is on the other foot. And this brings us to an important point, which is that Alexander doesn't ask the entire League of Corinth what to do with Thebes. He asks only the members who have old scores to settle. Some scholars suspect that this was deliberate, maintaining plausible deniability but still getting the result that Alexander wants. At any rate, with a few exceptions here and there, the entire city was bulldozed down. Even by ancient standards, this treatment is extremely harsh. When news of the awful fate of Thebes reaches Athens, the Athenians vow that they shall fight them on the beaches, but they shall never surrender. Only kidding. According to Arrian, The Athenians met in an assembly, chose 10 ambassadors and sent them to Alexander bearing the city's rather belated congratulations on his safe return from the Illyrians and on his punishment of the Theban revolt. You turncoats! It might be unsurprising that these ambassadors beg for mercy from Alexander. What is surprising is he grants it. After initially demanding that Athens surrender 10 of their most influential orators and generals, including the meddling Demosthenes, Alexander relents and agrees to leave them alone if they give up just one general, Charidemus. We'll meet him again on the Persian side in a few episodes' time. Stay tuned. Well, Athens, who's calling who Homer Simpson now, eh? Meanwhile, the other Theban allies, including those who'd sent an army but waited on the sidelines, executed the leaders of their revolts and begged Alexander for mercy. He let them off too. But doesn't this seem strange to you? Why is Alexander so harsh with Thebes and so lenient with Athens? Theories abound. Some suggest Alexander used Thebes to set an example to the rest of Greece, and just figured he'd made his point already without having to attack Athens as well. Others say maybe Alexander just didn't want any more delays before invading Persia. He's keen to get on. Others have argued that Alexander may have been particularly harsh with Thebes because they were supporting his cousin Amyntas in a bid for the Macedonian throne. Yet others figure he thought the reputation and naval prowess of Athens was better left intact to help him when he was conquering Persia. Whatever his reasons, the Greeks were paying attention. No member of the League of Corinth will ever rebel again during Alexander's entire reign. Later, Alexander will go on to regret his harsh treatment of Thebes and to blame some of his biggest challenges on it. For example, when he murders his friend Clytus the Black in a drunken rage, he attributes it to the wrath of Dionysus, god of wine, who was born in Thebes. Remember that one next time your drunken self does something your sober self regrets. Heave! Heave! Soldiers pull in unison on thick ropes wrapped around a tall Theban tower. Heave! More soldiers are chipping away at the limestone foundations, the sound bouncing off half-broken walls still standing in what used to be a bustling city. Heave! At first, the tower begins to emit a low groan. With more straining, a few cracks appear. Then finally, with one last heave, it suddenly gives way, blocks thundering to the ground, sending a puff of dry dust billowing up into the air. Behind the fallen tower, thousands more soldiers are working together to systematically demolish Thebes to the last stone. With the exception of both the temples, so as not to anger the vengeful Greek gods, and the house of the poet Pindar, who'd said some lovely things about Alexander's great-great-granddad back in the day. The heavy scent of fire hangs in the air as torches set fire to wooden beds, tables and chests inside houses, as well as their doors and support beams. The rising heat causes their terracotta roof tiles to shatter and collapse in on themselves, clattering to the floor. Meanwhile, men lug heavy mallets around the shattered city streets, smashing through off-white mud brick walls to level buildings to the ground. With immense effort, the circular stone drums that form the Doric pillars of public buildings are levered apart. As they come crashing down, they smash through the walled courtyards of once wealthy citizens and break apart their water fountains and pebble floor mosaics. Littered throughout the city are broken clay pots, olive oil lamps, and crushed wine jars, with not a cynic in sight. What was one of the two eyes of ancient Greece mere days ago has now been plucked out. Beware, Persia, there's a cyclops coming for you. In the distance, you can see the back of Alexander. the black tail of his favourite horse Bucephalus swishing in the breeze, and the red plume of his helmet marking his place at the front of the force he's leading home to Macedon. Enjoy it, lads. Ain't gonna be long before you're desperate for some home comforts. Because it's about time those Persians got their asses kicked. And you're gonna be kicking them for 11 long years. That's next time on Alexander the Great, Empire on Fire. Thanks for listening to Alexander the Great, Empire on Fire. If you'd like to read the full ancient accounts of Alexander's sack of Thebes and the aftermath, you can find translations on my website, alexanderthegreatpodcast.com. There's also an article comparing all the sources on this one event, with tables comparing where they agree and disagree. So too for related topics like the story of ancient female badass Timoclea, who was attacked during the sack of Thebes, and of ancient Theban practices such as gay marriage before the tomb of the mythical hero Iolaus, follow my accounts on TikTok and Instagram with the handle Alexander the Great Podcast. Catch you next time.